Hello everyone, this is Mrs. R, and I wanted to take just a few minutes to go over some background information for the summer reading novel, which is Ethan Frome by Edith Wharton. Some of you may have already started reading the book, some of you maybe haven't even cracked open the book, so whichever situation you're in, you may want to tune in to this little video, because I'm going to talk about some of the things that you might be having trouble with as far as comprehending what's going on in the book. And hopefully I can help clarify some things that you're having some trouble with. So here we go. Let's talk about the introduction to the book. Ethan Frome. And something to think about before you even start reading the novel, if you haven't started it yet, is what happens if people miss a chance to find happiness? You know, will they get another chance? What if they don't? What might happen to them if they don't end up getting what they really want out of life, and how does that affect them as people? And that's something that you really want to think about in terms of Ethan and his character. Does he miss out on a chance to find happiness, and how does that affect him throughout the novel? Of course, if you haven't started reading yet, there's a couple things that you need to know about the way the story is told. And the first thing is, an unnamed narrator is spending the winter in a small New England town called Starkfield. So the narrator does not have a name, so don't look for it, it's just the narrator. And he tells us a little bit about himself at the beginning of the book, but he is not directly involved with the meat of the story. Okay, so he's just kind of an outside narrator looking in. And one of the people he observes at the very beginning of the novel is a man named Ethan Frome. And he describes him as tall, he has a very dramatic limp, so he does not walk fluidly, and he has a really bad scar on his face, so his face is almost disfigured in a way. So pay close attention to that. That's going to reveal something important about him, not just an event that happened to him in his life, but also it reveals something about his character on the inside as well. And of course, Ethan lives on a farm. He's very poor, it's in the middle of nowhere, it's very isolated from the rest of the community of Starkfield, which is isolated in itself, but he's even further away from the town. And it's just a very poor area, it's falling apart, it's old, it's run down. And he really seems to have given up all personal interests and really has no joy in his life. Everything's very bleak, everything's very dark, everything's very depressing for him. So he has trouble finding joy in anything because of his surroundings and the things that are going on in his personal life. Of course, he lives with his wife named Xena, short for Zenobia, but everyone in town calls her Xena, and her cousin, Maddie. And so make sure we don't get those characters mixed up. Xena's the wife, but she is related directly to Maddie, but Maddie is a little bit younger than she is. So after you read the introduction, you might be thinking, what's happened to these people? Why are they living such a depressing life? Why are all of them so miserable? Why is everything so depressing and bleak in this book? Well, the unnamed narrator tries to figure that out. He's like, what is going on with Ethan Frome? He's the ruin of a man. He looks awful. What could be wrong with him? So he tries to kind of determine who Ethan is, what his situation is, and he figures out his own version of the story. So the story that we get about Ethan is the narrator's perspective. It's not necessarily 100% true. This is what he pieces together. So you've got to keep that in mind when you're reading. It's not all 100% reliable. So Ethan, Xena, and Maddie form a hopeless love triangle. Okay, and in this love triangle, they are all attempting to find happiness or escape because all of them are miserable as it is. So they try to, through each other, find some sort of happiness or escape. But unfortunately, in this story, it doesn't end well. So another thing to remember, which I've kind of already talked about this, but Ethan Frome is a frame story. So in a frame story, one story introduces another and then returns at the conclusion. So what you have at the beginning is the narrator, the unnamed narrator that we talked about, and he introduces the story. Then, starting with the second chapter of the story, that's Ethan's story. That's the second story, right? The story within the story. And then at the end of the book, the last chapter, we come back to that unnamed narrator. So don't get those confused when you're reading. The narrator begins the story with his own experiences. He tells us a little bit about who he is, his life, his background, and then he describes, based on his first sight of Ethan Frome, he describes what he thinks happens to him. And finally, he returns to his own perspective at the end of the novel. So that's a frame story. So don't get confused by what's going on and who's speaking and who's talking. And that's the structure of the story. Okay, the narrator, Ethan's story in the middle, and then back to the narrator. And a little bit about Edith Wharton. You don't need to know a lot about her, but she was born into a rich family in 1862. Lots of money, high society. She was very sophisticated and came from a very sophisticated family. A lot of reviewers at first weren't sure about Wharton because, of course, this book is about a poor farmer in a poor town, and they weren't really quite sure if she could write about that. But she was able to very specifically portray how difficult it was for these farmers, just very difficult labor, hard work, and really for nothing. So Ethan, does backbreaking work every single day for nothing, really. He still has very little. So she did have kind of a difficult life. She divorced her husband. He had affairs. She had an affair. She moved to Paris eventually, and when she was there, she wrote probably her most famous novel. Let me go back here. Which is called The Age of Innocence. So that's probably her most famous work. But that's just a little bit about her. But some people, some critics, this has not been confirmed or anything like that by Wharton herself, but some critics think that the affair that her husband had when they were still married, some of those events inspired some of the events that happened in Ethan Frome. So part of the novel itself could be sort of autobiographical and contain some elements from her own life. So if you have other questions about Ethan Frome, you can email me, okay, srasmussen@wfisd.net. Send me a tweet if you need something, but hopefully this helped clear up a little bit of the confusion if you were having some about the book. So start reading. I put some post-it note annotation examples on my Moodle site. So that's moodle.wfisd.net if you want to check that out, if you're having trouble with the post-its. But just let me know if you have any other questions. I hope this helps. See you guys soon.